This small act of kindness restored hope for a family in trouble. The Thompson family lived in a quiet, modest neighborhood on the edge of the town. Their small two-story house had seen better days. The white paint on the walls had started to peel, and the front yard was overgrown with weeds that seemed to appear overnight, no matter how often Mark, the father, tried to pull them out. Despite the house's worn appearance, it was home, and it carried the warmth and love that only a family could create. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of coziness and quiet tension. Mark Thompson had always been a hard-working man. For over a decade, he had worked at a local warehouse lifting heavy boxes and managing shipments. It was not the kind of job that brought fame or wealth, but it had always provided a steady income. However, last month the warehouse had announced a sudden downsizing, and Mark had been one of the employees who lost their jobs. The news had hit him like a punch to the chest. He had never been unemployed in his life, and the thought of not being able to provide for his family filled him with a deep, gnawing worry. Emily, Mark's wife, was a kind and caring woman who had always balanced her family and work with grace. She worked as a waitress at a local diner, a job that demanded long hours and late nights. Despite her best efforts, her salary barely covered the essential bills, and every month it was a struggle to make ends meet. Since Mark had lost his job, Emily had taken on extra shifts, working from early morning until late at night, trying to fill the gap in their income. She would come home exhausted, her feet aching, her hands stained with the smell of food and coffee, but she never complained. Her priority was always her children, Lily and Noah, and she carried the burden silently, not wanting to add more worry to their young lives. Lily, their daughter, was 9 years old. She was a bright, curious child with big brown eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Lily loved to read and spent hours lost in books, imagining worlds full of magic and adventure. But recently, she had begun to notice the tension at home. She saw the worry lines etched on her parents' faces, the way Mark's shoulders drooped when he sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unopened bills. She sensed the unease, even if she didn't fully understand it. At school, she had started to worry about things she never thought of before, like whether there would be enough food for dinner or if her father would find another job soon. Noah, the younger child, was 6 years old. He was energetic, playful, and full of questions. He loved to run around in the yard, kick his soccer ball, and laugh at the smallest things. But even he had begun to sense that something was different at home. He noticed that meals were smaller, that his parents were quieter in the evenings, and that sometimes they seemed to whisper to each other when they thought the children were not listening. Though he did not fully grasp the situation, he felt a subtle tension in the air, a weight that seemed to hang over the family. Life in the Thompson household had changed slowly, almost imperceptibly, over the past few weeks. Every morning the routine was the same, but the energy in the house had shifted. Breakfasts were quieter, with less laughter and more hurried conversations. The family would gather around the small wooden table, eating toast and scrambled eggs, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But even as they ate, the shadows of worry loomed over them. Mark would glance at the bills sitting on the counter, his fingers drumming nervously while Emily tried to keep the conversation light, asking about the children's school projects and friends. Despite the challenges, the Thompsons did their best to create a loving environment. On weekends, they would play board games, watch old movies together, and take walks in the nearby park. These moments provided temporary relief from their worries, small pockets of happiness that reminded them why they were fighting so hard. Lily would often curl up in her mother's lap with a book, while Noah would chase squirrels and butterflies, laughing with pure joy. These simple moments of connection were precious, but they could not completely erase the underlying fear that hung over the household. Mark spent his days searching for work. He would wake up early each morning dressed in his worn-out work boots and a faded blue jacket, and walk to local businesses to drop off resumes. He checked online job postings and made phone calls, hoping for a response that never seemed to come quickly enough. Each rejection letter or unanswered email added to his growing anxiety. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him, the fear that he might fail his family in their time of need. Emily, meanwhile, balanced the demands of her job with the needs of the household. She would wake up before sunrise to prepare breakfast and lunches, then rush off to the diner for her morning shift. When she returned home in the afternoon, she would immediately start preparing dinner, helping the children with homework, and cleaning the house. By the time her evening shift began, she was exhausted, but she kept going, fueled by love and determination. She often stayed awake late into the night, calculating budgets, clipping coupons, and trying to find ways to stretch every dollar. The children, though young, were incredibly resilient. Lily found comfort in writing in her journal, expressing her thoughts and fears in words she could control. She would write about her day at school, her dreams for the future, and her hopes that her family would be okay. Noah, on the other hand, found solace in play. He would build towers out of blocks, draw colorful pictures, and imagine adventures that took him far away from the worries of the real world. Despite the uncertainty surrounding them, both children tried to hold on to a sense of normalcy, finding small joys wherever they could. Neighbors occasionally offered kind words and small gestures of support. Henderson, an elderly woman who lived next door, would sometimes bring over a loaf of bread or a jar of homemade jam. She would check in on the Thompsons, asking if they needed anything and offering advice from her years of experience. While these gestures were appreciated, they could only go so far. The family still faced the harsh reality of mounting bills, shrinking savings, and the looming threat of losing their home. One particularly cold evening, as the wind howled outside and snowflakes began to drift gently down from the sky, Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bills in front of him. Emily had just returned from her shift, her coat dusted with snow, and the children were quietly playing in the living room. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken fears and worries. Mark rubbed his temples, feeling the pressure of responsibility crushing him. He thought about the future, about what would happen if he could not find work soon, and about the promises he had made to his family. Emily noticed the tension in his posture and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll figure it out," she said softly, trying to reassure both him and herself. "We always do," Mark nodded, appreciating her words, but the worry in his heart did not fully dissipate. He wanted to believe her, he truly did, but the uncertainty of their situation made it difficult. That night, as the children slept, the house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. Mark and Emily sat together at the kitchen table, reviewing their finances once more. They talked in hushed tones, careful not to wake the children, discussing potential solutions and trying to make sense of their situation. Every option seemed limited, every plan fragile. Yet, despite the fear and anxiety, there was a thread of determination that bound them together, a determination to protect their children, to maintain hope, and to persevere. No matter how difficult the path ahead, in that small, modest house, a family faced uncertainty, struggle, and fear. But within their walls, there was also love, resilience, and the quiet courage that comes from standing together in the face of adversity. The Thompsons did not know what the future held, but they clung to each other, finding strength in their unity and in the hope that even in the darkest times, brighter days could come. Days turned into weeks, and the Thompson family's struggles slowly became more visible. Mark spent every morning going from one business to another, leaving resumes, shaking hands, and trying to make a good impression. Sometimes he would return home with small encouragements. They said they might call me next week, but more often than not he returned empty-handed. The disappointment weighed heavily on him, making him quieter than usual. He would sit in the living room, staring at the carpet or the bills stacked neatly on the counter, trying to think of a solution. Emily, meanwhile, had begun to notice the toll the stress was taking, not only on Mark, but on herself as well. Her body ached from the long hours at the diner, her feet swollen from standing for so long, but her mind ached more. She worried constantly about what they would do if the rent wasn't paid or if the electricity was turned off. Every little expense felt monumental, and even small problems felt like mountains. She sometimes went without lunch, telling herself she could manage on coffee and a piece of toast, just so she could stretch the money further for the children. Lily, ever perceptive, had begun noticing changes too. She saw her father's worried frown and her mother's tired eyes. She saw the smaller portions of food at dinner and the unopened packages of pasta or canned goods that were meant to last a long time. At first, she tried to ignore it, focusing on her schoolwork and reading, but soon she began to worry that the world she knew, the comfortable life she had always taken for granted, might be slipping away. She started checking on her younger brother, making sure he had enough to eat, and would sometimes save a bit of her own snacks to share with him. Noah, young and full of energy, didn't fully understand the situation, but he could feel the change. He noticed that his parents were quieter at the dinner table, that his mother sometimes cried in the kitchen after he went to bed, and that his father's laughter was less frequent. He didn't say much, but he felt anxious, and his normally bright and cheerful personality dimmed slightly. Even his playtime was different. He became more thoughtful, more cautious, almost sensing that something serious was happening. The situation reached a new level of tension one cold evening. The family had just finished a small dinner of soup and bread when the mail arrived. Mark opened the envelope with a sense of dread, and his face fell immediately. It was an official notice from their landlord. The rent had not been paid for the last month, and they had 10 days to pay before facing eviction. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he read the words over and over, hoping that somehow it was a mistake, but deep down, he knew it was not. Emily's eyes welled up with tears, and she put a hand over her mouth to stop herself from crying in front of the children. Lily and Noah watched, confused and worried, sensing the seriousness of the moment even if they didn't understand all the details. For the rest of the evening, the house was unusually quiet. Mark sat at the table, running numbers over and over in his head. Emily tried to comfort him, though she felt just as worried. The children went to bed earlier than usual, sensing that something heavy hung in the air, something that even adults could not fully fix. That night, the family slept fitfully, each one tossing and turning as anxiety gnawed at their hearts. The following days were filled with attempts to find solutions, but nothing seemed to work. Mark contacted every possible employer, even considering jobs he had never imagined doing before. He filled out applications online, went door to door at stores, and made countless phone calls. Each day brought hope followed by disappointment, and the cycle began to wear him down. Emily worked even longer shifts at the diner, skipping breaks whenever possible, bringing home leftovers for the children and herself. She kept a careful record of every penny, trying to stretch the money as far as it could go, but the bills seemed endless. Despite all this, the family tried to maintain a sense of normalcy. On weekends, they would take short walks to the park nearby, trying to enjoy the little things: a bird perched on a tree branch, the crisp winter air, the sound of children laughing at a distance. Mark would push Noah on the swings while Lily held Emily's hand, skipping along the path and pretending that everything was fine. These moments, though brief, were precious. They reminded the family of the life they were fighting to protect, of the love they shared, and of the resilience they had cultivated over the years. However, the stress began to take a toll in more visible ways. Emily noticed that Lily had stopped reading as much, her once bright imagination now overshadowed by worry. Noah became quieter, less playful, and more clingy, often seeking comfort from his parents. Even the dog, a small golden retriever named Max, seemed to sense the tension, lying quietly at the children's feet instead of running around the yard as he usually did. Every day the household felt heavier, the air thick with unspoken fears. One particularly difficult afternoon, Mark and Emily had a serious conversation about what they would do if the worst happened. They sat at the kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the window, and spoke quietly, trying not to alarm the children. They discussed the possibility of moving in with relatives temporarily, cutting down on every expense, and seeking help from local charities. Both felt a mix of fear and determination. They would do whatever it took to keep their children safe and cared for. But the reality of the situation was overwhelming. Even with their plans, there were no guarantees. The uncertainty was crushing, and at times it seemed impossible to see a way forward. The children, though young, could sense the seriousness of the discussion. Lily sat quietly in her room, her journal open in front of her, but she could not bring herself to write. Noah clung to Max, stroking his fur, while his small eyes looked toward the kitchen, trying to understand why his parents looked so worried. The innocence of childhood was slipping, replaced by a premature awareness of the harsh realities of life. As the days passed, the Thompsons' home became a delicate balance between survival and hope. Every small act, a borrowed loaf of bread from a neighbor, a friendly word from a colleague, a temporary promise of payment from a potential employer, was treasured. But the underlying fear remained, a shadow that followed them from room to room. Meals were carefully rationed, bills meticulously organized, and every dollar spent was weighed against the possibility of a worse outcome. The family lived in a state of constant vigilance, aware that a single mistake or unforeseen expense could tip the scales. Even with all the difficulties, there were moments of light. Emily would occasionally find ways to make small joys for the children, like baking cookies with what little flour they had, or creating crafts from scraps of paper. Mark would sometimes tell stories of his childhood, of adventures he had as a boy, trying to make the children laugh and forget their worries even for a short while. Lily and Noah, in turn, tried to remain cheerful, offering smiles and small acts of kindness to their parents, understanding in their own way that happiness could be shared even in hard times. Neighbors began to notice the strain on the family. Some offered kind words or small gestures of help, a basket of vegetables, an extra blanket, or advice from those who had experienced hardship themselves. While these gestures could not solve the family's larger problems, they reminded the Thompsons that they were not entirely alone. That sense of connection, even in small measures, was a lifeline, a reminder that people still cared and that hope might not be entirely lost. Despite the mounting challenges, Mark and Emily refused to give up. Every day they woke early, went through their routines, and fought against the despair that threatened to overwhelm them. They reminded themselves, over and over, that this situation was temporary, that perseverance and courage could carry them through. They held on to the belief that solutions existed somewhere, even if they were not yet visible. In the evenings, when the children were asleep, Mark and Emily would sit together, holding hands and talking quietly about their dreams for the future. They spoke of better days, of stability, and of the kind of life they wanted for Lily and Noah. Though the weight of their struggles was heavy, these conversations reminded them of why they kept fighting. The love they shared, their commitment to their children, and the small glimpses of hope in their lives became their guiding light in the darkness. And so, the Thompsons continued to face each day with courage, despite the fear and uncertainty that surrounded them. Their lives were filled with challenges, but also with love, resilience, and the quiet determination to survive. They did not know what tomorrow would bring, but they knew they had each other, and that bond gave them the strength to keep going. In a world that sometimes seemed unforgiving, the family clung to the belief that hope could still be found, even in the most difficult circumstances. The days following the eviction notice were some of the hardest the Thompson family had ever experienced. Each morning began with the same heavy routine, Mark rising early, scanning local businesses for job opportunities, and Emily preparing for another long shift at the diner. The children tried to maintain their routines, going to school and finishing homework, but even their teachers noticed a change. Lily, once bright and cheerful, now appeared withdrawn at times, while Noah's playful energy was slightly muted, replaced by quiet observation. One particularly cold morning, Emily decided to take a small walk before her shift. The winter air was crisp, the sky gray, and the wind carried a sharp bite. She wrapped her coat tightly around herself, tying her scarf as tightly as she could, and stepped outside, leaving the house in the temporary care of her children and Max, their golden retriever. The walk was meant to clear her mind, to help her think through their problems, but it quickly became a reminder of the overwhelming challenges they faced. Every step reminded her of bills unpaid, groceries that were running low, and the uncertain future that awaited them. As she walked past the small row of shops near her neighborhood, Emily noticed a woman standing outside a bakery, watching the street with a kind expression. She was an elderly lady, perhaps in her 70s, with a warm smile and a gentle manner that seemed to radiate calm. Emily walked past quickly, avoiding eye contact, embarrassed to show her worry to a stranger. But just as she passed, the woman called out softly, "Excuse me, dear, are you all right?" Emily stopped, slightly startled, and turned. "Oh, I'm fine," she said quickly, forcing a smile. The woman shook her head gently. "You don't look fine," she said. "Sometimes people can tell even if we try to hide it. I'm Mrs. Suri Jacobs. I live just a few streets over. Would you like to talk for a moment?" Emily hesitated. Talking to a stranger was the last thing she felt like doing. Her mind was heavy with worry, and she had always been cautious about sharing personal struggles. But there was something in Mrs. Jacobs' voice, a warmth and sincerity that felt genuine. Emily found herself nodding slowly. Yes, I suppose that's all right," she said. Mrs. Jacobs smiled and gestured for Emily to sit on a nearby bench. For a few minutes, they talked casually about the weather, the town, and small community events. Then, as if sensing the deeper troubles in Emily's life, Mrs. Jacobs leaned in slightly and asked softly, "You seem worried about something more than just the weather. Is everything all right at home?" Emily's eyes filled with tears before she realized it. The tension and fear she had held inside for weeks spilled out in a few shaky words. She told Mrs. Jacobs about Mark losing his job, about the rent they couldn't pay, the bills piling up, and the quiet fear that their children would go without. She admitted how exhausted she felt, how trapped by circumstances she could not control, and how hopeless she sometimes felt about the future. Jacobs listened carefully, her eyes full of understanding. She did not interrupt, did not judge, and did not offer empty words. She simply nodded, allowing Emily to speak freely, and when Emily finally paused, she said, "You are carrying so much, and yet you keep going. That takes courage. But you don't have to do this alone. Sometimes a small bit of help can make a big difference." Emily felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had kept her struggles private, believing that no one could truly help, but the sincerity in Mrs. Jacobs' voice gave her a sense of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. Mrs. Jacobs reached into her coat pocket and handed Emily a small card. "This is a local charity," she explained. "They help families in need with rent, food, and other essentials. They won't judge you. They just help. If you're willing, you can contact them tomorrow." Emily clutched the card tightly, feeling tears run down her cheeks. She had heard of charities before, but she had always assumed they were for people in extreme circumstances, people whose troubles were bigger than hers. But now, seeing an opportunity for real help, she felt a glimmer of hope. She thanked Mrs. Jacobs repeatedly, unable to find words strong enough to express her gratitude. Mrs. Jacobs simply smiled and said, "Sometimes a little kindness is all it takes to set things in motion." They sat together at the kitchen table, the sunlight spilling through the window, and examined the card. Mark's hands trembled slightly as he read the information, but for the first time in weeks, his eyes held a spark of hope. "Maybe this is the chance we've been waiting for," he said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. They agreed that Emily would call the charity during her lunch break and see what assistance they could offer. Later that day, Emily dialed the number listed on the card. A kind, patient voice answered, asking for her situation and listening carefully as she explained. The person on the other end assured Emily that the charity could provide temporary assistance with rent and groceries and could also help connect them with local programs for job placement and financial planning. They scheduled an appointment for the following day, giving Emily a small but vital sense of relief. When Emily returned home and shared the news with Lily and Noah, the children were overjoyed, though they didn't fully understand all the details. Lily hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "We're going to be okay, right?" Emily nodded, tears in her eyes, telling her children that help was on the way. Noah bounced up and down excitedly, Max barking beside him, as if sensing that something positive was happening. For the first time in weeks, the house felt lighter, and the heavy weight of fear lifted slightly. The next day, the family visited the charity with Mrs. Jacobs' encouragement. The offices were small but welcoming, filled with friendly volunteers and posters that emphasized hope and community support. Emily and Mark spoke openly about their struggles, and the volunteers responded with kindness and practical assistance. They offered temporary help to pay the overdue rent, provided grocery vouchers, and even suggested programs to help Mark find new employment opportunities. The Thompsons left the office feeling a mixture of relief and gratitude, realizing that their lives could take a turn for the better with just a little support. That evening, as they walked home through the quiet streets, Mark and Emily held hands, feeling a sense of hope that had been missing for so long. They talked about the future, about plans for the coming weeks, and about the small steps they could take to regain stability. The children ran ahead, laughing and playing, their energy returning as if the burden of worry had been lifted from their young shoulders. The family felt connected, stronger than they had in weeks, and motivated to face the challenges ahead with courage. In the days that followed, the small act of kindness from Mrs. Barrett Jacobs continued to have a ripple effect. Emily started budgeting more effectively, knowing that the temporary relief would give them time to plan. Mark, encouraged by the support, renewed his efforts to find employment, visiting more businesses and networking with friends. Lily and Noah noticed the change in their parents and began to smile and laugh more freely, bringing warmth back into the household. Even the simplest tasks like preparing dinner or folding laundry felt lighter because they were no longer carrying the weight of despair alone. The Thompsons realized that life was still challenging and they would have to work hard to regain stability. But for the first time in weeks, they understood that they were not powerless. A small act of kindness, a conversation with a stranger who truly cared, had changed the trajectory of their lives. It reminded them that hope could exist even in difficult times, and that sometimes the world could surprise you with unexpected generosity. Emily often reflected on that morning with Mrs. Jacobs. She realized that the kindness of strangers was not just about material help, but about the recognition of struggle, the acknowledgement that someone cared, and the reassurance that they were not alone. It inspired her to hold on to her own strength, to teach her children the value of compassion, and to believe that even small actions could have monumental effects on the lives of others. The family began to see each day with renewed optimism. Even the small, ordinary moments, the laughter of the children, the smell of bread baking in the oven, Max chasing his tail, became precious reminders that life could still hold joy amid struggle. And though the road ahead was long and uncertain, the Thompsons understood that hope, once sparked, could grow, and that the smallest act of kindness could change everything. The following week was unlike any the Thompson family had experienced in months. The small act of kindness from Mrs. Jacobs and the support from the local charity had created a spark of hope that seemed to grow with every passing day. For the first time in a long time, Mark and Emily felt that their struggles, while still present, could be managed. They approached each day with renewed energy, fueled by the knowledge that someone cared and that help was available when needed. Mark had begun working with a job placement program suggested by the charity. The program provided him with resume assistance, interview tips, and even a few temporary job placements to help cover immediate expenses. Every morning he dressed carefully, his worn-out shoes polished as best as he could, and walked to the nearby offices or factories that had openings. Each interview brought nerves and anxiety, but also a growing confidence. For the first time in weeks, he felt capable again, able to contribute to the household and to fight for his family's future. Emily, meanwhile, was able to take a small step back from her grueling double shifts, bearing the diner, but the financial support from the charity meant she no longer had to overextend herself just to keep food on the table or the lights on. This small relief allowed her to focus more on her children, spending quality time with Lily and Noah, helping them with homework, and restoring a sense of normalcy in their home. The atmosphere, once heavy with worry, began to lighten. Laughter started to return, and the children's smiles grew more frequent. One evening, after a particularly successful day for Mark at a temporary job site, the family gathered for dinner. It was a simple meal, pasta with a tomato sauce and a side of vegetables, but it was prepared with a sense of gratitude and calm that had been missing for weeks. Lily, who had been quietly helping set the table, looked around at her family and smiled. "It feels nice to all be together," she said softly. Noah nodded, his eyes bright as he added, "I'm happy too." Mark smiled at his children, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Emily reached over and squeezed his hand, their silent connection saying everything words could not. That moment, simple as it was, symbolized a turning point. The family had been through fear, uncertainty, and sleepless nights, but now they were beginning to feel the effects of hope, kindness, and support. The following days brought even more change. With guidance from the charity, Mark was able to secure a temporary full-time job at a nearby warehouse, giving the family a steady income. It wasn't a high-paying position, but it was enough to pay the rent, cover groceries, and slowly begin addressing other debts. The relief was immense. For the first time in months, Mark and Emily could breathe without the constant weight of financial worry pressing down on them. The household, once tense and heavy, was alive with energy and optimism. Lily and Noah responded to this change in profound ways. Lily, who had struggled with focus at school, began participating more in class, her confidence returning. She helped her younger brother with his reading, and both children started to find joy in their routines again. They laughed more freely, played games in the living room, and even helped Emily with household chores, understanding in their own way that every small effort contributed to the family's well-being. The home felt alive again, filled with the sound of laughter, conversation, and the simple rhythm of family life. One day, Mark came home from work to find Emily and the children preparing a small surprise. They had used a few extra dollars from their budget to buy ingredients for a special dessert, a simple chocolate cake. Lily decorated it with frosting, carefully writing "thank you" on top, while Noah added sprinkles with excitement and enthusiasm. Emily smiled at her children's creativity, feeling a sense of pride and love that warmed her heart. Even Max, their loyal dog, wagged his tail as if sensing the happiness around him. That evening, the family sat together at the table, enjoying their cake and sharing stories from the day. Mark spoke about his work, the challenges he faced, and the small victories that made him feel capable again. Emily shared funny stories from her shifts at the diner, and the children excitedly recounted moments from school. The conversation flowed easily, laughter filling the room, washing away the heaviness of previous months. It was in these moments that the Thompsons truly realized how far they had come, and how much difference a single act of kindness could make in turning their lives around. The emotional impact of the kindness extended beyond material support. It restored faith in humanity, reminding the Thompsons that there were people who cared, even strangers. Mrs. Jacobs' simple gesture of stopping to ask about Emily's well-being had opened a door that seemed impossible to reach. It led to financial support, practical guidance, and, most importantly, emotional reassurance. The Thompsons began to understand that the world was not entirely harsh and unforgiving. There were people willing to help, to listen, and to make a difference. As the weeks passed, the family continued to stabilize. Bills were paid on time, groceries were plentiful, and the children's laughter filled the home more than it had in months. Mark excelled at his temporary job, impressing his supervisors with his dedication and reliability. Emily found a rhythm that balanced work and family life, no longer pushed to the brink by exhaustion. Even the smallest details, a warm bath for the children, freshly laundered clothes, and a tidy home, became sources of comfort and pride. One day, Mark received a call from the warehouse offering him a permanent position, based on his excellent performance and dedication. The news brought tears of joy to Emily's eyes and wide smiles to the children. For the first time in months, the family could imagine a future that felt secure, a future in which they could plan ahead, dream, and rebuild. That call was more than just a job offer. It was a symbol of resilience, perseverance, and the transformative power of kindness and support. The family decided to visit Mrs. Jacobs in person to thank her properly. When they arrived at her modest home, they were greeted with her warm, welcoming smile. Lily handed her a small bouquet of flowers they had picked from the garden, while Noah proudly showed her the chocolate cake they had made earlier in the week. Emily and Mark spoke from the heart, explaining how her kindness had set everything in motion and how it had changed their lives. Mrs. Jacobs listened quietly, a gentle smile on her face. "I only did what anyone would do," she said softly. "But I'm so glad it helped. Remember, kindness always comes back around." Jacobs' home, with full hearts, deeply grateful for the impact she had on their lives. They realized that the smallest acts, listening, caring, offering support, could ripple out and create enormous change. This understanding became a guiding principle for the family moving forward. They promised each other that, in their own way, they would also offer help to others in need, keeping the cycle of kindness alive. As winter slowly gave way to spring, the Thompsons' life had transformed. Their home, once quiet and tense, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and a sense of hope. Lily and Noah thrived in school, their curiosity and energy fully restored. Mark felt proud of his work and his ability to provide for his family again. Emily, while still hardworking, found moments of joy and peace, knowing that the future was not as uncertain as it had seemed. The family had endured hardship together, but through perseverance, love, and the support of kind strangers, they had emerged stronger, united, and hopeful. Even the simplest daily routines now carried new meaning. Preparing meals, helping with homework, and spending time together became acts of celebration, reminders of how far they had come. The Thompsons understood that life would always bring challenges, but they also knew that hope, love, and kindness could transform even the darkest circumstances. The experience had taught them resilience, empathy, and the importance of community, lessons that would stay with them forever. That climax, the moment when hope fully returned, was not dramatic in a conventional sense. There were no sudden miracles or fantastical events. Instead, it was a quiet, deeply emotional transformation rooted in human connection, compassion, and perseverance. The Thompsons had faced despair, uncertainty, and fear, but through one small act of kindness, they rediscovered the light that had always existed within them. It reminded them, and anyone who would hear their story, that even in the darkest times, the simplest gestures can have the power to change lives completely. Life for the Thompson family had changed in ways they could not have imagined just a few months ago. What had started as an ordinary day filled with worry, uncertainty, and fear had turned into a story of hope, resilience, and new beginnings. The small act of kindness from Mrs. Jacobs and the support of the local charity had created a ripple effect that transformed their lives entirely. Mark woke up one morning with a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. The sunlight streamed through the window of their modest home, and for the first time in a long while, he felt able to breathe freely. The bills were being paid on time, the rent was secure, and he had a steady job that not only provided financial stability but also restored his confidence. He looked around the living room, where Lily was reading quietly on the couch and Noah was building a tower of blocks, Max resting at his feet. A sense of peace and pride filled him. This was his family, safe and happy, and he had worked hard to keep them that way. Emily had also experienced a profound transformation. She was no longer constantly exhausted from overworking herself, and she had time to devote to the things that truly mattered, nurturing her children and enjoying the small joys of daily life. She spent mornings helping Lily with school projects, afternoons baking with Noah, and evenings sitting with Mark to plan for the future. The tension that had once dominated the household was replaced by warmth and laughter. The simple act of kindness from a stranger had reminded her that even when life seemed dark, hope could still find its way in. The children, Lily and Noah, flourished in this new environment. Lily, once quiet and anxious, now spoke up in class, sharing ideas and answering questions confidently. She no longer worried silently about her family's struggles, but instead enjoyed her days at school, proud of the progress her family was making. Noah's energy returned in full force, his playful spirit brightening the home once more. He and Lily even began helping with small chores, understanding in their own way that teamwork and care could make life easier for everyone. The children's happiness became a mirror, reflecting the stability and love that had returned to the household. The Thompsons also began to give back to their community, inspired by the kindness they had received. Emily and Mark would occasionally volunteer at the same charity that had helped them, offering assistance to families in need. They shared their story with other parents, explaining how even small gestures of support could make a world of difference. Lily and Noah participated as well, helping organize small events or donating items they no longer needed. Through these experiences, the family learned an important lesson, that kindness, once received, could and should be shared with others. One weekend, the Thompsons organized a small neighborhood gathering to celebrate their newfound stability and to thank the community that had quietly supported them during their hardest times. They invited neighbors, friends, and even some of the volunteers from the charity. The house, once quiet and tense, was now filled with laughter, conversation, and music. Lily performed a small recital on the piano she had saved for, and Noah shared a drawing he had made depicting their family surrounded by sunshine and smiling neighbors. Mark and Emily stood together, smiling proudly, realizing that the family they had worked so hard to protect was now thriving and surrounded by warmth and support. The experience also strengthened the bond between Mark and Emily. They had weathered months of hardship together, facing fears, disappointments, and sleepless nights. Through it all, they had supported each other, drawing strength from their love and commitment to their children. Now, with stability restored, their relationship felt stronger than ever. They laughed together more freely, planned for the future with hope, and took time to appreciate the small moments that made life meaningful. Even simple activities like sharing a cup of tea in the evening or watching the children play in the yard became sources of deep contentment. Financially, the family's situation continued to improve. With Mark's permanent position at the warehouse and Emily balancing her job more effectively, they were able to slowly pay off debts and save a small emergency fund. While the future still held challenges, unexpected expenses, or minor setbacks, the Thompsons now felt equipped to handle them. They had learned practical skills in budgeting, planning, and problem-solving, but more importantly, they had gained a renewed sense of resilience. They understood that life might not always be easy, but with determination, support, and care, they could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Emotionally, the family had also grown in profound ways. The hardship they had faced had taught them empathy, patience, and the importance of community. They had learned to communicate openly about their worries, to support each other unconditionally, and to recognize that seeking help is not a weakness but a strength. These lessons became ingrained in the family's daily life. When disagreements arose, as they naturally do in any household, Mark and Emily approached them with calm understanding. The children, seeing their parents' example, learned to resolve conflicts peacefully and to express their feelings honestly. The family had developed not only stability but also emotional intelligence and harmony. The Thompsons never forgot the person who had started this chain of positive change, Mrs. Barry. Jacobs became more than just a friendly neighbor. She became a mentor and a cherished friend. Emily would often visit her for advice, and the children loved spending time in her garden, helping plant flowers and vegetables. Mrs. Jacobs shared stories of her own life, of challenges she had faced, and of the small acts of kindness that had shaped her journey. In turn, the Thompsons shared their experiences, celebrating the full circle of generosity that had brought hope back into their lives. One particular afternoon stood out as a symbol of how far the family had come. The sun was shining, birds chirped in the nearby trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers through the neighborhood. The Thompsons were in their backyard, surrounded by friends and neighbors. Lily and Noah were playing a game of tag, laughing until their cheeks were red. Emily and Mark sat together on a bench, watching their children and holding hands. Max ran happily around the yard, barking joyfully. For a moment, everything felt perfect, a picture of peace, love, and fulfillment. Mark turned to Emily and said, "Do you remember how hopeless it all felt just a few months ago?" Emily nodded, tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Yes," she replied softly, "but we made it through. We didn't give up, and someone's small act of kindness reminded us that hope can come when you least expect it." They both fell silent for a moment, reflecting on the journey they had taken, from fear and despair to stability and happiness. The children joined them, breathless from playing, and Lily hugged her parents tightly. "I'm so glad we're okay," she whispered. Noah added, "Me too, and I want to help people like Mrs. Jacobs helped us." Emily and Mark smiled, feeling a deep sense of pride and joy. Their children had not only survived the hardship, but had also learned the value of compassion and the power of helping others. This, perhaps more than any material stability, was the greatest reward of all. As the months went by, the family continued to grow in confidence and resilience. They established routines that balanced work, school, and family time. They celebrated small victories, Mark earning a promotion at work, Emily completing a special project at the diner, Lily receiving recognition at school, and Noah winning a small neighborhood soccer match. Each success, no matter how minor, was cherished and celebrated, reinforcing the sense that life could be meaningful and joyful even in the aftermath of hardship. The Thompsons also became active participants in their community. They volunteered at local events, helped neighbors in need, and shared their story at charity gatherings. They wanted others to know that even when life seems overwhelming, help can come from unexpected places, and that every small act of kindness matters. They believed in passing forward the generosity they had received, understanding that it was not only a way to give back, but also a way to keep hope alive for others facing struggles. Through it all, the family never lost sight of gratitude. Every morning, Emily reminded the children to appreciate what they had, to value family and friends, and to notice the kindness around them. Mark, once weighed down by worry, now reflected daily on the progress they had made and the lessons learned. The children, guided by their parents' example, developed habits of empathy and gratitude, noticing how small gestures of help or encouragement could brighten someone's day. Looking back, the Thompsons could see that the hardships they had faced were not just challenges, but opportunities for growth and understanding. They realized that the struggles had strengthened their family bond, deepened their empathy, and shown them the importance of community. They also understood the value of resilience, the quiet determination to keep moving forward even when the path seems impossible. And most importantly, they learned that hope, once kindled, could grow and spread, transforming lives in ways that might never have been imagined. The family knew that life would continue to bring obstacles, but they were no longer afraid. They had faced fear, uncertainty, and despair, and had emerged stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Their home was no longer a place of tension and worry, but a haven of love, joy, and hope. And every time they looked at each other, they were reminded that the greatest strength comes from unity, kindness, and the courage to keep believing in better days. As the sun set over their quiet neighborhood, the Thompsons sat together on their porch holding hands and watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. They reflected on their journey, on the days of fear, the nights of anxiety, the small victories, and the transformative power of kindness. In that moment, they understood something profound. Life is not measured only by material success or wealth, but by love, compassion, resilience, and the ability to care for one another. And so, the Thompson family's story came full circle. What had begun as struggle and despair had become a journey of hope, growth, and transformation. Through perseverance, love, and the ripple effect of a single small act of kindness, they had discovered the true meaning of strength and community. And as they watched the stars begin to appear in the evening sky, they knew, deep in their hearts, that no matter what challenges came next, they would face them together, with courage, love, and unshakable hope.